The first time anyone noticed 3I/ATLAS, it was just a faint, silent point sliding through a sequence of images from the Mauna Kea Observatory in Hawaii. A junior technician marked it as possible interstellar object and flagged it for review. By morning, half the major observatories in the world had confirmed it. A long, dark body entering the solar system at an angle that didn't make sense. At NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, the air smelled of burnt coffee and overworked electronics. Monitors lined the control room, showing orbital projections, velocity graphs, and a growing thread of internal messages tagged with a single word, anomalous. Dr. Elena Voss leaned forward in her chair, elbows on the desk, her eyes locked on the trajectory feed. Her assistant, Raj Patel, looked between screens. "It's slowing down again," he said. Elena didn't answer. She was already running the math. Interstellar objects didn't slow down, not unless something was pushing them. At 0317 UTC, 3II/ATLAS adjusted its path by nearly 2 degrees, shedding speed relative to the sun. The press office called it non-gravitational acceleration. Elena called it what it was, control. Within 24 hours, the story leaked. Astronomers, journalists, and conspiracy channels ran wild with theories, a derelict probe, an alien ark, a weapon. The official line from NASA was that the data required further analysis. But no one believed that. Even amateurs could see the changes in its light curve. In Houston, at Johnson Space Center, the phones never stopped ringing. The Pentagon wanted models for potential impact scenarios. The United Nations requested private briefings. Cable news played simulations of fiery collisions on repeat. By the end of the week, Atlas was on every screen in the world. Elena didn't go home for 3 days. She slept on a couch outside Mission Analysis, her laptop open beside her. Each night, the object's velocity dropped a little more, like it was braking against invisible resistance. By the 4th day, it was clear. 3I/ATLAS wasn't going to pass through the solar system. It was aiming. She was called into a closed meeting with representatives from NORAD and the Office of Science and Technology Policy. A uniformed colonel asked the question out loud that everyone had been afraid to voice. Is there any chance this is natural? Elena hesitated. If it is, then nature's learned how to steer. The colonel didn't smile. As Atlas crossed the orbit of Mars, its structure became clearer. Radar echoes revealed sharp geometry, hexagonal panels, meter-thick struts. It wasn't an asteroid. It wasn't debris. It was built. Panic set in slowly, then all at once. Stock markets convulsed. The president went on television to assure the public that international efforts are underway. Russia and China announced joint military drills. The internet drowned in live streams, countdowns, and hoaxes. At dawn on April 28th, the Deep Space Network captured something no one expected. A repeating radio pattern embedded in microwave frequencies. It wasn't random. It pulsed at fixed intervals, forming symmetrical clusters of prime numbers. The signal repeated every 78 seconds. Raj listened to the transmission in the analysis lab, frowning. "Could be automated," he said. Elena nodded. "Or intentional." He looked up. "A message?" She didn't answer. When the object reached 0.9 astronomical units, it changed course again, this time directly toward Earth. Every telescope on the planet tracked it as it slowed to orbital velocity. The first visible image came from the Hubble Space Telescope, a long, dark silhouette, smooth and deliberate, glinting with the cold light of the sun. Its rotation was almost perfect, its surface oddly featureless except for faint seams that caught sunlight like scars. That night, NORAD detected an energy spike from the upper thermosphere. Something massive had entered a stable orbit above the Pacific, moving silently. No heat signature, no debris trail. By morning, the world knew. It wasn't coming to crash. It was here to stay. Commercial flights were grounded. The stock exchanges shut down. Power grids flickered under the electromagnetic interference that rippled through the atmosphere. Communications satellites reported sudden, inexplicable faults. At JPL, Elena stood on the rooftop as the horizon turned violet. For a few seconds, she thought she saw it. A faint, perfect curve against the dawn, reflecting sunlight like a second moon. Raj came up behind her. They say it's holding position. 36,000 kilometers. Geostationary over the Pacific, Elena didn't look away. Holding for what? He didn't have an answer. The wind was cold and dry, carrying the faint hum of distant power lines. Somewhere below, alarms began to wail as one more network failed. Up above, Atlas moved just enough to catch the first full light of morning. Its surface shimmered, and for a heartbeat, the entire sky seemed to flicker. Not bright, not loud, just wrong, like a heartbeat skipping in the dark. Elena felt it in her chest before she heard it. A low resonance, like pressure before a storm. Something in orbit was awake. The first strike was invisible. 3 interceptors launched from Vandenberg Air Force Base, rising through a thin fog that glowed orange in the pre-dawn. Their targets were the largest cluster of objects orbiting within a narrow band above the Pacific. Fragments that had detached from 3 I/ATLAS days earlier. On the ground, every console at NORAD flickered with tracking data. The whole operation lasted 11 minutes. Then, without warning, all telemetry feeds went black. No explosions, no heat signatures, just silence. At mission control, the room froze. Someone whispered, "We've lost the birds." Another voice, "All 3. Static bled through the speakers, low and steady. Then nothing. The interceptors had vanished, as if erased. Hours later, the president's science advisor called an emergency meeting. Elena Voss sat at the edge of the conference table, unshaven engineers and uniformed officers crowding around her. A live feed showed the object still locked in its perfect orbit. "They didn't shoot them down," said General Keegan, staring at the screen. "They turned them off." No one disagreed. Every system that had gone near ATLAS, satellites, probes, even automated weather balloons, had simply ceased to respond. By the end of that week, communications networks began to fragment. First, GPS timing signals fluctuated, then the data links between satellites failed. Planes had to land manually. Civil aviation stopped. Submarine cables reported interference, as if a massive magnetic storm had wrapped the planet. But there were no sunspots, no solar flares. Atlas hovered above it all, motionless, dark, patient. The military called the phenomenon electromagnetic dominance. Civilian scientists preferred a simpler term, blackout spread. Within 2 weeks, the global internet fractured into isolated regions. Nations began broadcasting shortwave updates, grainy and uncertain. At night, the sky flickered with faint ribbons of light, green and silver bands that moved across the atmosphere like ghostly auroras. People took photos until their phones stopped working. The bands weren't light at all. They were the reflection of microscopic metallic dust scattered from the orbital fragments. It fell in fine threads, invisible until it caught the right angle of sunlight. Elena's team was moved to a secure facility near Colorado Springs. From there, they monitored what remained of the deep space network. She spent her nights watching the signal patterns coming from the object, a series of low-frequency pulses, precise, measured, each one spaced exactly 78 seconds apart. They had begun before the blackout and had not stopped since. Raj found her asleep at her desk one morning, the sound still playing through the lab speakers. He shook her shoulder gently. "Still at it?" he asked. She rubbed her eyes. "It changed last night. The pulse structure. It's adding harmonics." "Meaning what?" She frowned. "Meaning it's adapting." On the 4th week after arrival, the first atmospheric disruption occurred. Over the Pacific, several weather stations reported a sudden drop in temperature, 10 degrees in less than an hour. The metallic dust layer had thickened, dimming the sunlight. Power grids struggled to compensate for the drop in solar energy. Crops in the southern states began to fail. By early June, the dust layer had circled the planet. Days grew darker. Satellites below the layer lost contact with those above it. From the ground, Atlas was only visible at twilight, a dull crescent shape that glowed faintly red when the sun hit its surface. The Pentagon ordered one last attempt to re-establish communication with the remaining satellites. Elena sat in the command center as technicians sent encrypted bursts toward the object's orbit. Every response came back garbled, a dense mesh of repeated binary. After hours of analysis, Raj noticed something. "It's echoing our own packets," he said quietly. Elena leaned closer. The data stream was indeed familiar. Fragments of Earth transmissions, reflected, reordered, compressed. The object was speaking in our language, but rearranged beyond recognition. She looked up at the general. "It's learning how we talk." The next day, all global navigation systems failed. Planes grounded, ships adrift, drones offline. Then the satellites began to fall, not burned, simply descending, their orbits decaying faster than any model predicted. They slipped through the thickening atmosphere and burned in silence, one after another, streaking across the night sky like dying meteors. Each one carried fragments of human history, maps, communication logs, songs. The sky rained memory. In Denver, the blackout hit at sunset. Lights flickered, then went out. Within hours, the grid collapsed across most of North America. Power stations overloaded and failed in cascading shutdowns. Elena and her team worked by flashlight. They rerouted their generators to keep the uplink alive, feeding on what little remained of the satellite network. The data from ATLAS kept coming. Pulses, harmonics, signals that no longer fit human logic. She stared at the final transmission window before the signal vanished completely. It wasn't random noise. It was a sequence, ordered, symmetrical, deliberate. Every fifth pulse carried a short burst of amplitude modulation. Raj counted the intervals. It matched Morse timing. He decoded it, letter by letter. The word appeared on the monitor in pale blue text, REPLACE. For a long moment, no one spoke. Outside, the mountain air was still. The last emergency broadcast stations fell silent one by one. Somewhere in the distance, the sky flashed. Not lightning, but the burn of falling satellites. Elena stood by the window, watching the horizon fade beneath the dull reflection of the object that now circled them like a second moon. She could no longer see the stars behind it. The war had already begun, and not a single shot had been fired. By the end of July, the stars were gone. The metallic veil surrounding the planet had thickened until the night sky turned into a faint gray dome. Even the moon was just a smudge behind the haze. The world had grown smaller, darker, as if the heavens themselves had closed in. The last reliable grid went down on August 4th. Cities that once pulsed with light became islands of shadow. From orbit, Earth must have looked like a dying ember, fading under a blanket of metal dust. At the Mountain Research Facility near Pikes Peak, the generators still ran, for now. The hum of their engines echoed through empty corridors lined with half-dead monitors and flickering emergency lamps. Elena Voss walked those halls like a ghost, one of the few still working. She slept little, ate when reminded, and kept one eye always on the uplink tower outside the window. It was their last connection to the world beyond the ridge, if the world still existed beyond it. Raj was gone. He had left with a convoy 2 weeks earlier, driving east toward Kansas, where reports claimed a cluster of farms still had power. The last transmission from his vehicle came through a static-filled burst. "We still see stars here." Then silence. Elena spent her nights listening to the radio bands, the hiss of static, the occasional faint voice breaking through. Most of the time, it was nothing but the steady pulse that had haunted her since ATLAS arrived. Every 78 seconds, a soft hum, constant and patient. Sometimes she imagined it breathing. When the last external feed came in from the Deep Space Array in Chile, she watched alone in the control room. The video showed a horizon burning faintly red. For a moment, the camera caught the outline of ATLAS, not as a single body anymore, but as a network of thin arcs stretching across the sky like the ribs of a colossal machine. They glowed faintly, shimmering against the atmosphere, and then the feed cut to black. That night, the vibrations began. At first, it was a low tremor, deep beneath the mountain, like faraway thunder. Then it grew, rhythmic, deliberate, pulsing in sync with the same 78-second interval. The consoles flickered to life without power, screens filled with streams of unreadable code. The lights dimmed, then stabilized. Elena stepped outside into the cold air, her breath visible under the faint gray glow from above. The sky shimmered, not clouds, but the lattice of ATLAS fragments drifting like constellations of dark glass. Each one reflected the dying light from below, forming a vast, shifting grid that moved in perfect unison. For the first time, she understood what it was doing. The vibrations weren't random. The frequency was harmonizing, resonating with the planet's magnetic field. The object wasn't merely observing Earth, it was aligning it. The realization felt like a knife in her chest. Inside the control room, alarms began to wail. One of the researchers, a quiet man named Howard, shouted from behind a bank of monitors. "Magnetic flux spike. The core readings are fluctuating." Elena's voice cracked. "How much?" He looked at her, pale. "All of it." The tremors intensified. The ground shuddered like a living thing. Far below, the crust itself seemed to groan. In the distance, lightning arced silently across the haze, dry, white, electric. Then came the light. A column of silver rose from the western horizon. Not an explosion, not a weapon, but a seamless thread of brilliance stretching from the ocean to the edge of the sky. Another followed, and another. until the entire horizon was lined with vertical shafts of light. They pulsed together, slow and steady, in rhythm with the heartbeat of ATLAS. Elena pressed her hands to the window. "It's activating something," she whispered. Howard backed away from his station. "If it's feeding off the magnetic field, it could..." He didn't finish. The power cut out. The facility plunged into darkness. Outside, the silver beams bent inward, converging somewhere far above the atmosphere. For a few seconds, the entire sky turned white, too bright to look at, too vast to understand. Elena stumbled to the console, trying to restore the feed. The monitors flickered, then came to life. Data streamed in, seismic readings, radiation levels, electromagnetic output, all rising beyond measurable limits. And then amidst the chaos, a single transmission appeared. It wasn't a signal from ATLAS, but from somewhere closer. An automated distress beacon from the International Space Station, still in decaying orbit. It repeated the same phrase, "Systems overwritten." She watched as the numbers stabilized. The ground stopped shaking. The air outside glowed faintly, the temperature dropping sharply. Snow began to fall, slow metallic flakes that melted into tiny mirrors when they touched the ground. Elena walked outside one last time. The mountain was silent. The world below was covered in a dull, reflective sheen, as if the earth had turned to glass. In the distance, cities were faint smudges of dim light, still burning for now, but fading fast. Above her, Atlas hovered, vast, symmetrical, no longer a ship, but an architecture that encircled the planet. The lattice hummed with impossible precision, light rippling along its structure in measured pulses. The planet was now part of it, a component in a greater machine. Elena raised the small handheld recorder she'd been using since the beginning. Her voice trembled, but it was steady enough. "To whoever might hear this, we thought they came to destroy us, but that was arrogance. They came to use us, to make this world their foundation, a node in something we can't even imagine. Maybe this is how civilizations end, quietly, efficiently, without hatred or war. Just replacement." She lowered the recorder. Snow continued to fall, glittering under the pale silver sky. In the distance, a single beam of light cut through the horizon, the last reflection of a sun that no longer reached the ground. The hum deepened, vibrating through her bones, soft and final. Elena looked up at the sky one last time and whispered, almost gently, "We reached the stars after all." The light consumed the mountain, then the world, and the sky, that silent, endless machine, kept turning.